start in like a few minutes. 40. Hey, Daniel. We'll start in a few minutes. Give a chance for everybody to either get over here or get on. But if you want to get started, you can. Just cleaning. We'll start in like about a couple minutes. We're going to do packet tracer. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, I guess. If you are able to log into your computer and then get packet tracer going. If you downloaded and saved it on your USB, you can run it from the USB or copy and paste the executable to the drive for the school computer. And then you might need to do the installation because they had wiped it. So we are going to do lab 8-2. Sorry for the lateness because I was waiting for IT to get back to me whether they were going to drop the drivers in today, but they weren't able to do that this morning. So I had to reassess and do other things. But this is going to be a good opportunity for you to learn how to use the actual router. So when you start working on the routers, we do have routers for you to use. When the drivers are available, you're going to be whipping through it. So it's going to be easier. As I mentioned before, we are going to always refer to the documentation. So just real quick, we are going to use a router, a Cisco router 1841. This is actually a router. If you look up Cisco 1841, okay. And they had retired this a while ago. So you do find some used ones that are pretty cheap. You can find like the refurbished ones. So if you want to practice on an actual device, if you can't afford it, there are quite a few websites. I used to use Cable and Kits quite a bit to get some used things from them. Their refurbished system is pretty good. And so, but you do see that there are quite a few companies that refurbish router. Cynthia, how are you? So when we start working with Cisco, we always want to check out their documentation. This is an older router, so old commands and new commands will work. You're gonna see that like for example, you can do exit on the old device, and the new device that's just gonna end. Instead of doing interface command, you can actually use vloop command. So there are some commands that are old, and Cisco no longer use some of the old commands on the newer equipment. So the newer commands are a lot easier to use, in my opinion, but you always want to look at the documentation, okay? So here it shows you a little bit about, the Cisco devices, and Cisco have some documentation. You can take a look at that, okay, on how to use it. So on this one, if you look at the diagram on the documentation, it actually is for a smaller type of location. Your local area network is going to be smaller scale compared to something, a different router that's going to handle. So at the corporate office, you want to use a different model, but at a branch, you can use this particular model. So I just want you to know that that's this. And also the services behind it is the protocol that's implemented. Mostly going to be the same. There are some features. So for example, if you want to use VoIP, or if you want to use something, you got to make sure that that feature is available for your system. Okay, so check out the features and things if you want to go a little bit further in understanding that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Packet Tracer. And in Packet Tracer, it's really simple. You are going to go to Network Devices on the bottom, and then select the router, which is round. And then you would have various models. So the 1841 is like farther down on the right. You're gonna drag it into your workspace. So that will be the router 1 or 0. Okay. Then we are going to add a couple end devices so you can see how it's added. So go to end device, you're gonna put in a couple terminal PC. So, and when we connect system to the router, if it doesn't have the wireless capability, you are gonna use a console cable that's crossover, right? Like what you've seen. So make sure that it is a crossover cable for Cisco. So I researched a little bit, and I found out why you were not able to see, even though we were putty in. So all of these USB cable it has a chip called the FTDI. And that chip stores the firmware for the RS-323, which is originally in their old serial cable. So if you don't have that driver, and your Microsoft environment is not going to be able to configure that because it is a unique driver, then you're going to have to download it. That's why when we went and we download it, but you have to restart the system. On the new cable, sometimes if it's a good cable, it automatically configures. It would run the firmware as soon as you plug it in. So it is truly plug and play, right? Is it really always the case? No. So I bought some USB-C cable. They're a Chinese brand, but it is Cisco crossover. I'm going to test it after the end of this class, and I'm going to see, but IT couldn't install the driver this morning. I really pushed for it to go for this morning, and I keep bugging them, but they just didn't have time to do it this morning. So tomorrow is when they're going to come. So we're going to come back to that lab, okay? So when you drop the devices into your workspace, you are gonna click the cable, which is the lightning rod, and the crossover is gonna be the dotted line, okay, the dashed line. There are two types, but the straight one. So that's what you're gonna use. And when you click on this, right, you have to click on the system where you're gonna be connecting. So if I click on this, And then I go here from the computer. I'm going to go ahead and choose Fast Ethernet, which is your network interface card. Click that. And then you're going to connect it to the router by clicking the router and then choose the 00, which is the first port. So on the router, unlike the switch that we've seen, it only usually have a few ports. It's not designed to connect a lot of systems. It's just to connect one in and maybe a couple outs, or, you know, so you're not going to have a lot of different ports on a router compared to a switch. So this is just for practice, but ideally you're only going to need one terminal, one system that's going to connect to it. And you can use their console cable and then free up the 2 Ethernet port to connect, like, you know, switches and things like that. Okay, so I just want to, this is really for practice. So click that. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other PC. So you have some practice. And you notice that before we configure, it's going to show the red triangles because it's not fully configured. So we have to go in and give it an IP address and then set up the default gateway on the PC. So that way it's fully configured, and then it's going to turn green. So in the beginning step, it shows you how to be able to add in the router, the 1841, which is different than the 1941. So the 1800 series is an older router, and then you're going to add in a couple of PC, and then you are going to connect them using the Fast Ethernet. So it would look something like that. I screenshot that. So, okay. Then when you want to get into the router, just like what we've done in Packet Tracer before, this now, before the old Packet Tracer, you have to turn it on. And on the new Packet Tracer, I think they just have it enabled turn on when you added that device, but always make sure that there's a green button or the green light, the LED shows that it's on. So that's how you turn it on and off. Okay. All right, so we are going to click on this on the router to look at the interface. And so this gives you the back shot of the router itself. Okay, when you mount it to a rack, you mount it backwards if you want easy access. The rack looks really nice if you have it face front, right? But you're gonna find out that when you start plugging in cable, you have to crawl in there, and then when you have a bunch of wires and different things, it's gonna be really difficult. So when we mount the router, we mount it backwards. The connection is gonna face you on the outside, and then the LED lights is on the inside. Okay, because we need access to that for console and things like that. Some of the router, the console is actually in the front. Some of them, they're in the back. So if the console is in the front, right, you want to be able to mount it face front. And then if it's in the back, you have to flip it backwards. So on the old routers, what you see is you're gonna see how the console cable is back here, and then their 2 Ethernet or their port connection is back here. So I would flip this, right, make sure that it faces me so that way I can plug in the cable, and it's easier for you to wire that way. Okay, and then always label your cable. So make sure it's turned on, then you're gonna go into CLI. So the first time that you access the router, let's say you open it and you get it out of the box and you plug the power in, this is what you see, okay? After you started the initial configuration, or what Cisco called the basic configuration, you're not gonna see that anymore. You are going to see what we talk about in the modes, right? You're gonna see the user exec mode, the privilege exec mode, and your config mode. So it's going to give you this screen, okay? And it's going to ask you if you want to configure, make sure that I can configure the initial configuration. You're going to type in yes, because there's nothing there yet, right? Now, if you buy an old router and if it has passwords and things like that, as I mentioned in the last session, just hold down the power button for like 30 seconds or so to like a minute, sometime longer than 30 seconds. When you start seeing all the lights blinking at once, that means you're flashing it. So what that does is it resets it to the manufacturer settings, and it makes the VRAM available to be rewritten, so it goes back to the original state. That's how we reset the routers or switches or Cisco appliances, okay? On the wireless side, there's a button, but okay, so when you type in yes, it's gonna ask you for basic management. And it's gonna, so basically they have an interface to walk you through some of the basic stuff that you need to set before you can start truly configuring it. So you are going to go ahead and put in yes. And then instead of using the command host name, which is equivalent, it asks you for the host name here. So by practice, most administrator, they're going to tell you they're going to label R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, or RT1, RT2, RT3, RT4, and so on. So it's basically just a way that we name the router. So depending on the company, but any textbook, any training that you're going to get from Cisco or people who teach Cisco, they're going to refer to like the basic name like R1. So we can call it R1. That's our first router. Okay. So you can schematically name it whatever you want, right? That makes sense to your company. So Michelle, we are at step 11. All right. So after we put in the host name, R1, you press enter, and then it's going to ask for secret. So secret is a passphrase or a password that you are going to use when you're in the encrypted session. Now, keep in mind that we are going to remote into these routers. You don't necessarily have to be at the data center or your rack to do this, right? You can configure it so that way you can connect via, through your firewall, and then you can configure, change your configuration as you do it. So in that sense, in that session that you are going to use to connect the router, it is an encrypted session, right? So it's going to require a secret passphrase. Okay, so I had you use my Cisco network, but whatever that is that you're using, make sure that you remember it. Otherwise, you have to flash it. Okay, oh, sorry. Okay, and then yeah, that's right. So on the next part, it's gonna ask you to enable your password. So if you read it, it tells you enable password is used when you do not specify an enable secret password. So it is a password of a password, right? So it's a secondary password, and Cisco used this for a long time, and they still do, a way to protect. So if if they crack your password to the router for the secret, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can, so if they try to brute force it, you have to have another password to back that up. So it's just a way that we want to use security, or we apply security in that matter. But like I said, it's just time, right? Like if they can crack the other password, give them time, they'll crack this other password too. So so the later system would use SSH, which is key-based, but then when you enable the secret, it for the encryption, it does generate a key. So we are going to just use CIS40A with an exclamation for our password. And then it also asks you for a virtual terminal password. So this is a password so you can connect to it via the network or the internet, like I said, remote into our system. And by practice, we don't use the same password. I'm okay with using your same password, so I'm just going to use the same one for now. Okay, so once you type in the virtual password, then you are going to, it's going to ask you for the SNMP. And I wanted to save this part for you to see it in command line later. So you are going to put in no, right? It makes more sense for us to do it once we have a network, because right now we don't have a network yet. We have things that are connected, but it doesn't mean we have a network, right? So you type in no, and usually you see in bracket, it's gonna tell you like the answer that you should put, okay? So it's pretty foolproof for most part. Okay, so it gives you this, and this is important because Cisco, however the interface is spelled out right there, that's how you're going to use interface. So interfaces are your port connection. On certain router, it uses fiber, right? This particular router uses fast Ethernet, and I think in the other packet tracer lab, we talked about the speed. So what we want is we want to make sure that we use these interfaces, and we want to assign the IP addresses to them. So, yeah, sorry, I think I gave you a different password there. But in any way, what you're gonna do is you're gonna see the interface, and in order to access it, you have to kind of select it, right? You have to tell it that this is the interface that I'm gonna be working on, okay? So before we get into command line. Okay, so enter the interface. Sorry, I gotta click my thing in here real quick. Okay, so enter the interface. So you are gonna type in fast Ethernet 0/0. That's gonna take you to the first interface. So that's equivalent to saying in command line in CLI interface fast, right? Fast etho 0/0. It's equivalent to that. You're gonna see some of that in a little bit. Okay, so now it tells me that I'm in the configuration mode for the interface. And do you want to configure the IP address? Okay, so we want to configure the IP address now. And you can always do it later if you say no by using the command line. But if it asks you this, just do it now so that way you don't forget. So you are gonna go ahead and type yes. Okay. And then the IP address, I gave you the IP address here. So we are gonna use a classful address, class C. So 192.168.10.1. And by now we should know, right? Like .10 is different than .20 because of the network ID. Okay. And by practice, we always use a .1 for that host because it's the first appliance that you see when you're entering from the internet. So sometimes you see a firewall in the front and they would use that as a .1. So logically, we wanted to really use the IP that makes sense, right? So when you come in from the internet, whichever the appliance that you see, usually the router or the gateway, that will be a .1. And then if you have a firewall that's behind that gateway, then that will be a .2 and then .3 and so on and so on. So the first, when you assign the DHCP, you want to keep like the first 50 to 100, depending on the size of your network for those static IP for your appliances. Okay. And then it's going to ask you for the subnet mask. We are going to use the default subnet mask. So enter the 255.255.255.0. Okay. And then we want to save this configuration. So we are going to go ahead and select 2. Okay. So what that does is when you save the configuration, it's equivalent to in CLI, what is that? No, what was it? I forgot now. See, short-term memory sometimes. No shutdown. Yep. No shutdown, which writes your whatever you can just configure to the RAM, the VRAM. Okay. All right. So now after we had done this step and this step for 20, we are going to see this. So you simply, when you boot up your router, you're gonna see, after you initially configure just what we did, you're gonna see this, right? But you want to now get into the configuration mode, so press enter, and you're gonna see the user exec mode, which is your host name and the little greater than symbol. Then what you're gonna do is you are gonna type in enable. I'm gonna check to see if en still works. Yeah. So enable or en, when I was trained, it was en, right? But you can do enable full word. And then it's gonna prompt you with this password, and this password is your secret password. Okay. And if you don't type it right, it'll just re-prompt again. There's no little symbol showing that you're typing in your password. So once you put in my Cisco network, which is the password that we initially created for, or the secret password, right? You're gonna see the R1 with the hash. This is where you are in what they call the privileged exec mode, okay? And in privileged exec mode, you can do some minor configuration, but in general, you usually use it to show, right? To display or to view, okay? And we're gonna come back to this mode later. So after I put in my secret password, okay, from step number 12, I would then use the command config term for configuration terminal, which is now going to take us to global configuration mode, so we can enter some information into our router. So you can do that. And you notice that once you enter the configuration, it shows that in the bracket, okay? If you're not in that mode, you can't configure, okay? So you have to get, there's 3 steps, right? We have to get to the user exec mode, enter the password, and then we got, you know, enable, and then we have to do the configuration mode. 4 steps. Okay, so once we're here, we are at step 24, and now we are going to call on the other interface. Okay, we are going to say interface fast Ethernet O/1, the second port, and then we're going to give it an IP, which is, notice that it is a different IP than the other one. And if you type wrong, it's going to give you a little caret pointing to which area of the command. So you just have to check your syntax and then retype it again. That's okay. It's practice right now, right? So here, when you are in the interface configuration, notice that it puts IF there, right? That means that you are now right-clicking, right? In the Windows environment, that's like right-clicking our network interface card and click property. It's exactly that, right? So in the router, we are accessing the property of the interface right now, and then we're going to set the IP. So you are going to put in IP address as the command, and you want to put the IP space subnet mask, IP space address, and then put in the IP 192.168.20, not 10.20.1, and then space 255.255.255.0. So you want to put in the IP and the subnet mask together, so you don't have to go back and redo it. And if it doesn't give you any error, that's good, right? It took it, okay? So when you look at that IP, we spent some time in subnetting this week. The .20 makes it different than the .10, isn't that correct? Because the first 3 octets are the network identifier. And so when you simply change from 10 to 20, it makes it a different network because the first 3 octets are, right? So we have 192.168.10, which is different than .20. And if you want to add another network, put a 30, right? A 40, a 50, and so on. And when you plan that, you have to see, okay, how many networks can I have in this particular class of address or this type of address? And then when you run out, you lean into the other class. You simply modify your CIDR, right? And then modify your subnet mask, but you have to reconfigure these guys now, right? Like the ones that are in existence. So it sees the other one. But on this router, it's a small router. So you can add another network with another router and then set that up. You can use a 10 dot whatever, a class A, and it should be able to talk. And that's what we're going to see how we can set route on the static. Okay, so once we set the IP address, you are going to do a no shutdown, which saves it. Okay. And then if you want, so what that does is that it stores your configuration. I think I used a couple commands in this to show you the difference. You can have it write to VRAM, which it also is a way that we can store the data. Okay. All right. Now I wanted to show you how you can do Snmp server. So really, to take a concept of Snmp, we talked about this when we learned about protocol, but you really have to manage Snmp to really fully understand it. So I encourage you to look at it from a network appliance standpoint and then be able to really see how it would be managed. So the way Cisco use Snmp, and we can use it to manage, right? So here I clipped this from Cisco. I took their work by verbatim and I put the link where you can read more about it. So simple network management protocol is working at the application layer, which is the highest in the OSI model. It provides you with the message format for the communication for the managers and agents. So you're going to have a manager and you're going to have agents. Think of it like server and clients, right? And SNMP provides a standardized framework for common language to be used in monitoring, managing devices. So it's a way for us to do inventory, basically, on a network. It's a way that device would see each other and how we can take one appliance and then manage thousands of other appliances, okay? Now we have software tools to do that, but you have to think about when networking was implemented with these type of protocol, there was not cool software with stuff that you can run reports on. So we have to find a way to really take one appliance and have it look at other appliances and be able to communicate, right, in management. So it uses these three operations: get, set, and notifications. So once you set up that service, what you can do is you can use those type of operations with that appliance, okay? And you know, just like this is made by developers, so I told my class last night, the functions is pretty straightforward. In C or C++, we teach get to obtain data and then set to store data, right? So that's what you see there, okay? And then if you wanted to read more about SNMP with Cisco, you can check that out. And then now we are going to do a route, okay? This is a static route. So what that does is it's going to take everything from that network, a .10 network, right? 192.168.10.0. You notice the network address? Remember what I said? You use it in the router, right? And that for whatever that's in that network, it's going to send it to another router, which is 10.10.10.2. So when do we do this? We do this with vendor. So for example, like I'm Target and I have to connect to Warner Brothers to update my inventory and make purchases, right? And I need to connect to the vendor network. And so I can set specific routes. So everything from that branch goes to that one appliance, okay? And how does it do it? It's gonna take your traffic, go through the ISP network, right? And then it's gonna find that router. Or in the dedicated network where you have, let's say that, you know, I'm NSA, this is my corporate branch, and I have a dedicated line to another router that's using a different IP address at another branch, right? So in the past, that's what they used to do, but it's very expensive to do it now, have a dedicated fiber that runs across the country or the world, right? So what will happen is your whatever that you send that to, that destination is going to be the route that's going to do. So we can do dynamic route, or we can basically it just pass it to whichever available router, which what happens in your internet. But when you need to do a dedicated route, that's how you do it. And it's going to take that, it's going to put it into a table in RAM. And then whenever that all the traffic from this interface, it's going to send it to that path. Okay, all the packets going to go there. Okay. Everything logically just so okay. So now we're still in that. So we're going to do an IP route. And then 192.68.10.0 with the 255.255.255.0 subnet. And then we're going to send it to 10.10.10.2. Okay. And it's not done, right? So you can store as many routes as you want, but you want to make sure that it's enabled. So so I added IP routing that is going to enable the routing, that static routing for that interface. Okay. So now you see how the network address is used with the subnet mask in a router. Okay. Then I wanted to also show you how you can use RIP. Okay. And in the chapter, I think, you know, the next class after this one is routing and switching, which talks about a lot more about this. And you know, that will be equivalent to like CIS26, I don't know, B or C at RCC, right? Because they break their class, the Cisco classes into like 4 or 5 classes. And I really feel that if you know Network Plus, and if you know the basic of this, you just need one more class in Cisco, or you know, another type of appliance, and you should be all right, right, in the network administration. Because when I was trained, it was like 2 chapters of Cisco. And then I have to dig through it and learn on my own, right? I was like, oh, they have manuals, so let's read the manual. All right. So we are going to do a RIP, and routing information protocol is used quite a bit. And this is used for small to medium size, and you want to use version 2. It is stable. It uses distance vector algorithm to calculate routes. So what do they mean by distance vector? It's kind of like when you look on your Google map and you're saying from your house to school, how long is that distance, right? So what the router does is it's going to pre-calculate the distance that it needs to send the packet from a source to a destination by the vector. Okay, so it's going to say, okay, well, from here to here is this, like, let's say 5, right? It has a value, or from here to here is going to be 7, so it's going to choose 5 in dynamic routing, right? So it's going to say, oh, I'm just going to go this way because it's shorter than this way, right? Now, open shortest path first is a little different than that. It's just the shortest that's available, okay? In distance vector, it actually measures out. So if you have like 20 routes, it's going to compare those 20 routes. That's the algorithm that they use at Cisco, and it's going to base the decision on the distance that's going to be most valid. Okay, so now in the case where if the value is low, but then you have some hops that are not available, guess what happens? It's going to go to the next one, right? So they build all of that into the algorithm. The router is very smart. you know, so it's always looking out like what's around it and what's available and how it's able to get there. Right. So when your packets get to the router, basically it's just going to pass, and it has to pass very quick. Otherwise, you're going to have bottleneck and congestion. So we are going to do a router RIP. And if you don't have RIP and feature in that router, it's not going to work, right? It's going to say error, you know, it can't find what that is. And we are going to tell it version 2, okay? Because there's RIP version 1 and there's RIP version 2. So the old one's going to use version 1, the later ones use version 2, right? So when you purchase a router, you want to look at what protocols does it come with, right? That tells you the capability of that router. Okay. So I give you a little bit of information about RIP there. And of course, if you go for Cisco certification, you have to know not just their proprietary protocol, but you have to know all the other protocol. And it's going to come to you. The more you use it, the more you'll be like, oh, that's what it is. And you just remember, okay? Like riding a bike. Then we are going to specify the list of the network that uses that particular route. So we are going to do a network command, and then we'll put in the router IP. Okay. So normally this would be like 2-3 labs in Cisco CCENT training, right? I just want you to know that. So what I did was I took what I felt like, you know, some of the highlights, important basic stuff that you should know, at least to get you the basics. And we will build more on this when we start working with the appliance, so you can experience like other protocols and things like that. All right. So we are going to, so when you, here it talks about disabling automatic summarization for the subnet routes into the network level router. This allows the subnet prefix routing information to pass across classful network boundaries with using the no auto summary command. Because if you summarize every time, just think about it, right? Like for humans, if we need to summarize everything that we have to do, it's going to take us a long time, right? You have to tell people that I am going to have to do this and this and this today. So the system is the same way. You want to kind of reduce that so it doesn't utilize too much of the resource. So we don't need to have the auto summary all the time. Okay, so you can set that. And so I wanted to show you. So no auto. I want to make sure my syntax is correct. Okay. Because we are using classful address, right? And so we can simply use that because it's already just in that class. So it doesn't need additional summary information for the prefix. And then when you, before you save on this, you have to exit out of the configuration mode. Okay. And then write to, what is it? Write memory, sorry. Let me check something real quick. I think I skipped a step. Okay, so sorry, you have to do exit twice. Do exit twice. Because you have to get out of the configuration mode. I put it somewhere and then I think I deleted it and I moved stuff around. So I'm sorry. I skipped a thing there. Okay, so now you are in the preview exec mode, then you are going to show. So every time that you configure by practice, okay, always remember to look at your configuration because you can mistype something, right? It doesn't show you what you type sometimes. So if you mistype something, you have to go back and fix it right away. So we always want to get the configuration. So this is how you can view it. Show running config. And it's lengthy. So there's more, and you just press enter to view more. So that means, what can I see? I see that I have a host name. I see that I have a secret. I have a password. I don't have IPv6. And then keep going. And so I still have to do spanning tree, right? We can save that for a later time because we're not going to have enough time today. I do have an interface set up with the IP. It is duplex automatically. You can use the duplex command, or the other command to set it if you don't want it duplex, but we want it duplex. We want it to concurrently in and out. So the speed is going to be auto, so it's going to auto adjust based on that, but you can set. So when do we really change the speed is if you have a lot of the appliances that's sharing that bandwidth and you need to regulate it. So let's say that, like, I don't want one to hog everything, right? I wanted to make it like everybody is going to be at 500 gigabit per second or something like that. Then I would be able to set my speed. But on these devices now, right, everything is auto. I know the book talks about you can set speed, and I think I covered that in the notes. So that shows you the speed. And then I have the second interface. I have all of that too, because we did the first one through the questions that, at the beginning at the interface. The second one, we did it through straight commands. So make sure that it's there. And I don't have a VLAN on the VLAN 1, which is your native VLAN. Okay. On the router, we don't really do much of the VLANs, but you can set up a native VLAN on that. And then we have a router RIP, right? A version 2. And then we are going to do that for our network. Okay. And then no auto summary. So whatever you enter, see how it saved it? Okay. And then for the classless, it shows that you have the route here. Why is it say classless? Do you know? Do you know why it says classless? Look at the class of IP address that you're using. You're using C and A together, right? And then you put in the middle the subnet mask for your your C address. So automatically it's gonna say, oh, it's not in the same class and they are in different class, so it's gonna treat it as classless. So it can still route it, because even though we're using classful for our local area network, beyond that we might have a classless. So that's how it says it. That's why it says it's IP classless. And then flow export version 9, that's just for on their side. And then we don't have any kind of console coming in. So if you do have console coming in, it would say that there. And then your auxiliary and your VTY. So all of those are just ports that you are connecting your system to something. And if you look at the interface, there are 3 additional outside of the fast Ethernet that it has. Okay. And then the password, login, and there you have it. Okay. So then we are going to do another command, and I want to show you how to do this, which is going to be interface brief for the IP. So we're going to do a show IP interface brief. And that's, otherwise, if you just do show IP interface, it's going to be very long, right? It's going to try to show. So in the case where it has a lot of different ports and IP, it's going to show that. So I just want like a brief summary. So it gives you the status. Is the port up? Yes, right? For both of my Ethernet, fast Ethernet ports, the only one that I need to configure is going to be the VLAN 1. I was going to add it today, but I wanted to save VLAN for switch, because once you learn that, it's going to be less confusing than using it on the router with the native VLAN. So you can do chunking on switch. So we'll do that at a later time. So I'll try to do one lab that we can configure so you will be strong going into this. And to be honest with you, like since I left my network administration stuff, like I teach this once in a while, I forget commands, right? Like I learn PowerShell and I learn other things and I, you know, I forget. So this is the things that you have to do regularly and then it's going to come naturally to you, just like how you do other things like programming and stuff like that. Okay. So it's been a little bit. And when I last taught this was at College of the Desert. So that was a few years ago, about close to 4 since I left there. This was the last class I taught that one semester before I left. Okay. And back then, like the packet tracer was not as nice as this now. I think this is stable. It used to crash a lot for the packet tracer. We were using like 6, I think. Okay, so what you want is take a screenshot of your output of your IP, and then go back to your workspace. It should be green now, right? The only thing that you probably need to do also for this part is to click on your PC and then go to config, and then you need to put in your default gateway 192.168.10.1. Okay. And then on this guy too. This is a 20, that one. And you want to put that respectively for the second and the first. All right. Then if you configure this and if it doesn't match up, right, it's gonna then either show red or, and you can always put your cursor on it, it gives you that. So take a screenshot of your topology. I had that same exact thing, Cynthia.
With what?
The sniffles and yeah, and it came like on Saturday when I was in Orange County.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and so
I'm just getting it now, so.
Yeah, I think it's just a cold that's been passing around, but I bounced back. So Theraflu worked really well for me, and I took a couple packets, went to sleep. I was high on Theraflu yesterday in the meeting. I was like, doo. You know how those cold medicine makes you kind of
they
blurred.
They do.
Yeah, I could not concentrate either. All right. So what you want to do is configure the default gateway. After that, right, you're gonna be like, Dr. Wynn, you made me configure it, now you're gonna make me delete it. So I want to show you how you can delete a PC, right, on Packet Tracer. So click on the click delete, and then you select the device and you can delete it. Okay. Then you can add in a switch. So network device, and then take a switch, and you can choose whichever one. I think let's see. Let's try the 2960. Yeah, the 2960 is good. It has a lot of ports. The 2960 24. And then whenever you connect to the router, always remember that you want to use the crossover. Oh, don't want it to be anymore. So now we can connect that to that. Okay. And then you can drop in a few more PC. So what I'm trying to simulate is the actual network, right? You would have a switch to a router and so on. And when you connect PC to the switch, you are going to use your regular straight through. Okay. Fast Ethernet to fast Ethernet. And then again, for the second PC. And then for the third, okay. Then you can make it look nicer and prettier. And it's going to take a little bit to turn on. Okay. Make sure we save this because we don't want to start all over again with Packet Tracer next time. And so that way we can come back to it and then we'll just reconfigure the switch itself. Okay. And then we'll do like trunking and all of that good stuff. So now, right now, as it is, your switch is just a switch, right? It's a dummy switch right now until you configure it to be a smarter switch when you make it manageable. So if you wanted to put in the IP address, right, go to CLI, okay, press enter. Here's the switch. So remember what I said, do enable, okay, and then config T or config term, same thing. And then what do I use next to set IP? Just the same command as what you learned in the router. What do I set IP? IP address, right? Actually, no, sorry, interface. So how do you get to interface? Interface. And what do I know about the interface? Can you look at the type of interface? It's using fast Ethernet. So let's drag this over here real quick. So the port that I'm using, okay, let's look at the configuration real quick. So here the interface. We connected the one to the router, right? Okay. So that means that we can configure the IP address for it there. Let's try. You can always show it. So interface. That's 0/1. And then here you can do IP address 192.168. And this is on the first side. So we do a .10, right? Let's give this guy a 2. Oh, did it not take it? Sorry. Yeah, it didn't like my IP address. Hold on, let me look at this model real quick that I'm using. 2960. So Catalyst, I think we have the same one. We ended the support on this. I wanted to see what kind of feature it has. Yeah, you can trunk on these. Configuration, STP on the switches. Multicast. There's the 24 port. Yeah, they have a full manual on this. It might just be IP. Check my topology. Connect it. I want to make sure that it is the right port. It's 2 gigabit Ethernet. No, that defeats the purpose. So oh. Connect that to the right. Or one is to the router. Hold on one second. Let me try something real quick. Give me 1 second, okay? Let me try something real quick. Big T. Actually, exit. Show. Interface. Okay, I see the problem. Okay, so when you connect this switch, okay, see, let me put the cursor on here. So when we connect, the way that we connect it with fast Ethernet like this, even though that it's up, it treats it like a dummy switch right now, right? You notice that on the bottom, it has 2 gigabit Ethernet, right? Those are down. So ideally, when we connect that out to, you know, another router, it should use the gigabit Ethernet. Why didn't I do that? Well, because if you think about it, gigabit going back to fast Ethernet, because the router is an older router, you're not maximized, you're not, so it's like having a big pipe and then narrowing it down to the small pipe, right? So we should be connecting on the gigabit Ethernet instead of the regular switch port. So in that case, right, when you're connecting it to a regular switch port, you have to use the switch port command, versus if it's still an interface, but it's going to see all the other ports that's in front of the switch. Those are the switch port. And for your gigabit Ethernet, that should be the main port that's going to connect out. I just want you to know that, right? So what you can do is you can use the switch port. Okay, let me show you. To set the IP. I think I made notes of this. Yeah. So when you go in, you have to get into the access mode, and then, so don't worry about the IP part for the switch right now. I think that we have to do a little bit more practice on this side in order to get, see? So once you have into the interface, if you're connecting it through the front of the switch, that's considered a switch port, and it's not going to be able to detect that unless you access it. So you can do it that way, just like what we have in the notes from last chapter. So for now, just take a screenshot of your topology like this. Okay, we will configure the switch later. It should be up and running without any kind of configuration, because now we use it as a dummy switch right now. And then you can always modify your topology down the line by removing things and adding things. So, and then we'll do the switch port, the IP, and the VLANs all at once in the next round. Okay. And then we'll do that in the regular appliance next week. All right, so that wraps up what we have to do today. And then just submit it. So now you can go home and practice more things. Remember, if you get stuck, you can always look at their documentation to see if, you know, they have really great tutorial on how to use, you know, different type of protocols and things like that. So that's what's good about Cisco. Any questions?
So for the IP classless, when it's determined classless, that means that's because there's 2 classes together.
Yeah, so remember how we were talking about like how the subnet mask was different, like the .254 or 252, something like that. That will be considered a classless subnet.
Oh, so
Yeah, so it doesn't belong to either class A or class B or class C. It's a mix. So you might have one IP that goes into another. In the router, when it sees the route, because you're routing to different class, you know, like the 10 compared to the 191, it treats it as a class list, so it would know how to defer to a different subnet mask than the classful subnet mask. Okay. So it's like if your house is at the border of two zip codes, right? You can go either or. That's how. So it's either classful where it's completely in a class, and then classless is it doesn't belong to a certain class. That's what it is. Okay. And the right term is the classful or the classless. The classless is it doesn't belong to any class, and the classful is when it belonged to a certain class. Yeah, so earlier, if you didn't catch that on the screen share, I was just hovering my mouse over this. And if you hover your cursor over your switch on the topology, you see that there are 2 gigabit Ethernet ports on that switch. And when you look at the interface, those 2 ports are really designed to connect out to this switch is actually a level 3 and up switch, so level 4 switch. So you're able to connect out to a router or even internet service provider line. So technically, we should connect our line to the gigabit Ethernet and then connect that to a router that has gigabit Ethernet. Then our backbone is going to be very strong, or fast, I should say. But since our router is an old router, we were, even if we use gigabit Ethernet, we're not able to increase the speed on the backbone. So when we say backbones, those are the main network appliances that's gonna take your packets and send it out. Okay, so the main switch, the main routers, and so on. So for now, I think we're gonna leave it as is, and then